5 strings broke. Only one remained. And what Jimi played with that single string meant no one in that room would ever be the same person again. The venue was small. A warehouse space in Lower Manhattan converted into something that barely qualified as a concert hall. Maybe 40 people sitting on the floor. Wood planks and concrete. A single spotlight hanging from an exposed beam. The kind of place where you could hear people breathing between songs. It was February 1968. Jimi Hendrix was already known, the album was out, the festivals were happening, the name was spreading, but this wasn't that. This was something else. An invitation-only session. Musicians, mostly. A few journalists. People who understood what they were witnessing wasn't entertainment. It was education. Jimi sat on a wooden stool in the center of the space. His Stratocaster resting across his lap. No stage, really? Just a cleared area with an amplifier behind him and people arranged in a loose semicircle on the floor. The lighting was dim. Intentional. This wasn't meant to be seen clearly. It was meant to be felt. He'd been playing for maybe 20 minutes. Not songs, exactly. Explorations. Long passages that moved through ideas like water finding its path. The audience sat motionless. Some had their eyes closed. Others stared at his hands with the focused attention of students watching a master demonstrate something they'd spent years trying to understand. And then it happened. Mid-phrase, during a sustained bend on the high E string, the note suddenly died. A small metallic ping. The string had snapped at the bridge. Jimi's fingers kept moving for a moment, muscle memory continuing the phrase, but no sound came. Just the ghost of what should have been there. He stopped. Looked down at his guitar. The broken string curled against the body, useless. The room held its breath. In any normal concert, this would trigger a pause. A guitar tech would rush out. A backup instrument would appear. The show would continue with professional smoothness. But there were no techs here. No backup guitars. Just Jimi and that Stratocaster and 40 people waiting to see what would happen. He didn't speak. Didn't announce anything. He simply adjusted his hand position slightly and continued playing. 5 strings now instead of 6. The passage he'd been exploring shifted. Different voicings. Different textures. He found the melody on the remaining strings, bent it into new shapes, pulled sounds from the instrument that hadn't existed 30 seconds earlier. 2 minutes later, another ping. The B string broke. Snapped clean at the tuning peg this time, the end whipping briefly before settling. 4 strings left. Someone in the audience shifted. A small uncomfortable movement. The kind of fidget that happens when you're not sure if you should say something. Should someone help? Should they offer a guitar? Was this part of the performance, or a disaster unfolding? Jimi didn't look up. His face showed nothing but concentration. Not frustration. Not concern. Just focus. He moved his fingers to accommodate the new limitation. Found the phrase again. Kept going. The music changed again. Sparser now. More space between notes. Each sound carrying more weight because there were fewer of them available. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. 3 more strings broke over the next 5 minutes. One after another. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just the gradual dismantling of the instrument he was playing. Each time, that small metallic ping. Each time, a brief silence as he registered the loss. Each time, an adjustment. A recalibration. A different approach to the same idea. Until finally, impossibly, there was only one string left. The low E string. The thickest one. The one that survived because it was built to withstand tension the others couldn't handle. The room was completely silent now. Even the people who had been breathing seemed to have stopped. 40 people frozen. Watching. Waiting. Jimi looked at his guitar. At the 5 broken strings hanging limp against the body. At the single string still taut across the fretboard. His expression was unreadable. Not disappointed. Not amused. Something else. Something that looked like recognition. He placed his left hand on the neck, index finger on the 3rd fret. His right hand hovered over the string. And then he played. One string. One note at a time. No chords anymore, those required multiple strings. No complex harmonies, those needed the full range. Just melody. Pure, stripped, essential melody. But the way he played it. The bends were wider now. He'd pushed that single string up toward the adjacent fret space where a string should have been but wasn't. The pitch would climb and waver and find notes that existed in the spaces between standard tuning. He used the full length of the neck. Played percussive hits on the body. Let the string ring and decay naturally, using silence as part of the composition. What emerged wasn't a limitation. It was a revelation. Every person in that room understood, in that moment, what they were witnessing. This wasn't a broken guitar. This was a demonstration. Not of technical skill, though that was evident. Not of virtuosity, though he had that in abundance. This was a demonstration of what music actually was. Not the instrument. Not the strings. Not the equipment or the setup or the circumstances. The music existed in the intention. In the choice. In the space between what you had and what you needed, and what you decided to do in that gap. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Among the 40 people sitting on that warehouse floor was a young guitarist named Michael Brennan. 22 years old. Studied at Berklee. Technical training. Perfect pitch. Could play anything you put in front of him note for note. He'd come to this session convinced he understood guitar. Convinced that mastery was about expanding your capability. More scales, more modes, more techniques, more strings, more everything. He sat 3 feet from Jimmy's left side. Close enough to see every finger movement. Close enough to hear the strings scrape against the frets. Close enough to watch, in excruciating detail, as his entire understanding of music collapsed. Because what Jimmy was doing with 1 string, Michael couldn't do with 6. It wasn't about the notes. Michael knew the notes. It was about the space. The silence. The way Jimmy would let a single tone sustain until it became a question. Then answer it with the same note, bent slightly sharp. The way rhythm existed not in strumming patterns but in the gaps between sounds. Michael had brought a notebook. He'd been taking notes earlier in the evening. Chord voicings, unusual fingerings, anything he could transcribe and practice later. But now the notebook sat closed beside him. His pen had fallen from his hand somewhere around the 3rd string breaking. There was nothing to write down. This couldn't be transcribed. This couldn't be practiced. This was something else entirely. When Jimmy finally stopped playing, the single string still intact, still ringing faintly in the amplifier, the silence that followed was profound. No one moved. No one applauded. No one seemed to breathe. Jimmy set the guitar down gently against his stool. Stood up. Looked at the 40 people sitting on the floor. His expression was calm. Not proud. Not expectant. Just present. Sometimes, he said quietly. The first words he'd spoken in over an hour. You don't need what you think you need. That was all. 7 words. Then he walked past the audience, past the amplifier, out the door into the February night. The session was over. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. Michael Brennan sat on the warehouse floor for another 20 minutes after everyone else had left. His guitar case was beside him. A beautiful Gibson ES 335. All 6 strings perfectly intact. Professionally set up. Exactly the kind of instrument a serious guitarist should have. He didn't open the case. Didn't touch it. Just sat there staring at the wooden stool where Jimmy had been sitting. At the broken Stratocaster still leaning against it, those 5 dead strings hanging like evidence. A man approached. Late 30s. He'd been sitting near the back during the performance. He had kind eyes and moved carefully, like someone who understood that Michael was processing something difficult. First time seeing him? The man asked. Michael nodded. Yeah, the man said, settling onto the floor beside him. That's a hard one. I'm David. I run a small studio uptown. I've recorded Jimi a few times. I don't understand, Michael said, his voice hollow. I've been playing for 14 years. I know theory. I know technique. But what he just did... With one string, David finished. I couldn't do that with 6. David was quiet for a moment. Then, that's because you're asking the wrong question. What question? You're asking how did he do that? You should be asking why did he do that? Michael looked at him. What's the difference? How is about technique? Why is about truth? David gestured toward the broken guitar. Jimi didn't play with one string because he's so skilled he can compensate. He played with one string because one string was what he had. And instead of treating that as a problem to solve, he treated it as information to use. I don't follow. You have 6 strings on your guitar right now. But I bet you play the same patterns regardless. Same voicings. Same habits. Same muscle memory. The guitar gives you 6 strings and you use maybe 2.5 of them actually intentionally. David smiled slightly. Jimi had 1 string and he used all of it. Every fret. Every technique. Every possibility that single string contained. Not because he had to. Because he chose to see what was actually there instead of mourning what wasn't. Michael felt something crack open in his chest. Not painful, exactly. But profound. Like a wall he'd built carefully over 14 years of training suddenly revealed itself as paper. I've been playing wrong, he said quietly. No, David corrected gently. You've been playing scared. Scared of limitation. Scared of not being enough. So you collected techniques and scales and modes like armor. But Jimi? He gestured toward the silent guitar. Jimi doesn't wear armor. He doesn't need to prove anything. He just shows up with whatever he has and finds out what it can become. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. The broken Stratocaster sat in that warehouse for 3 days. Jimi didn't come back for it. The venue owner called the number he'd been given but no one answered. Finally, on the 4th day, a representative from Jimi's management showed up. Not to collect the guitar, to ask if they could leave it. Jimi wants it to stay here, the representative explained. As long as you're willing to keep it. The venue owner, a woman named Sarah Chin who'd started the space as an experiment in alternative performance art, agreed immediately. She had the guitar mounted in a simple glass case. No placard. No explanation. Just the instrument itself, 5 broken strings still attached, hanging on the wall near where Jimi had sat. For the next 4 years, every musician who performed in that space would see it. And most would ask about it. And someone who'd been there that February night would tell the story. Some people didn't believe it. Thought it was exaggerated. Thought it was impossible to play anything meaningful with 1 string. But the ones who'd been in the room knew better. Michael Brennan went home that night and did something he hadn't done since he was 15 years old. He removed all 6 strings from his Gibson. Then he put just 1 back on. The low E. Just like Jimi's. He sat with that single-string guitar for 6 hours. At first, he tried to play songs he knew. They all fell apart. Everything he'd learned became irrelevant. Then, around 3 a.m., he stopped trying to play what he knew. He started listening to what the string could say. By sunrise, he understood. Michael Brennan went on to become a session player, but he never played the same way again. He kept that single-string guitar in his studio for 40 years. When younger musicians asked about it, he'd tell them, "Limitation isn't the enemy. Ego is." Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The broken Stratocaster remained in that warehouse until 1989, when the building was sold. Sarah Chin donated it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with one request: don't restore it. Keep the broken strings attached. Today it hangs in a small alcove with a simple label. Jimi Hendrix 1 string 1968. Thousands of guitarists pass it every year. Most take photos. Some just stare. The ones who understand don't need the label. They can see it in the 5 broken strings, in the single strand still stretched across the fretboard. Mastery isn't about having everything. It's about using what remains,